to My Turn Podcast, a gaming podcast hosted by extra competitive siblings. And today I'm joined by my brother from another mother, Tim!
Hello, sister from another mister.
I mean, that does work.
Yeah, I literally just thought of it as I was saying it.
So for anyone who hasn't listened to this podcast before, we are back at you with a brand new series. Unfortunately, we are still in poopy lockdown. It's been a tough year, hasn't it, Tim?
It's been a very interesting year. Yes, we're in lockdown 2, Electric Boogaloo, and we're in London. We're due to come out of it towards the end of next week into tier 2, which means we can go to a pub as long as we have a substantial meal. And in that honour, I'm having a stout right now, which I do consider to be a substantial meal because they're quite heavy.
When they introduced that rule, I was like, I'm basically going to have about 5 substantial meals every time I go to the pub now, just so I can stay there longer.
I've actually seen a brewery that have developed a beer called Substantial Meal, which I think is an excellent loophole.
That's amazing. I need to look that up. But thank you so much for joining us on our brand new episode of a brand new series. I am usually here with one or two of my, what should I call them? Birth brothers?
Flesh and Bloods.
Flesh and Bloods brothers. And I am the older sister of the birth flesh and blood sibling trio. And the reason we started this podcast is because we are all games obsessed. And Tim, I think you and I have found each other and remained very close for, how long have we known each other? 20 years?
20 years.
Yeah.
20 years as of about 2 months ago. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I met you on like the 2nd of October,
We're in our third decade. Third decade.
We're old, basically, is I think what
You are still the older sibling, though. I just want everyone to know in this arrangement.
So
you are still the oldest.
Four of us, I am still the eldest. But yeah, we are all games obsessed. We love them. And we're bringing you a lot more games this series, and we'll be joined by a lot more special guests because this lockdown thing has meant that people's availability is actually less consistent than it was before, which is weird because we're all stuck at home.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose people are getting quite intense about the chosen things that they're doing, if you see. So they might still be confined to one place, but I guess people are committing to a particular thing in a more intense way than they would have before, when perhaps everything was just, I might get around to it, I might not, I have options. We don't have options anymore. I don't know. Do you think that's it? What
you're saying, Tim, or at least what I'm hearing, is you think my flesh and blood brothers don't really love me?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But I was trying to sugarcoat it.
But you do, mate, so that's good. And I love you too. And I miss you. I miss seeing you in real life.
Oh, I know. I miss watching you fall off chairs.
Yeah, and spill things.
And spill things in real life, IRL.
But we are going to talk about some games, Tim, because the one silver lining of this year, I think, is I've played a lot of games. How about you?
So many games. I've played a whole bunch since I last spoke to you, and it wasn't even that long ago, really. But racking them up because it's just such good escapism from your seat.
I hear you and totally agree. So we are going to be talking about 2 video games in this episode. What game are you telling us about today, Tim?
I'm going to talk to you about Night Call.
Oh, well, should we get into it? Let's go.
Shall I tell you more about it right now?
Yeah, I mean, why not? Let's do it.
All right, you tell me what you're talking about later. So, Night Call, it was released for PC back in summer of 2019, and then converted for console a year later. It made it onto Xbox One and also Nintendo Switch. It did not make it onto PlayStation 4. The developers said they had quite a rough time with they got a separate company to try and convert it onto console for them. They found a lot of bugs when they converted it. It gave them a lot of grief. It was very expensive, and the game didn't sell that well for them. So they just had to make the decision not to invest in converting it for PS4, unfortunately. The developers are Monkey Moon, with Black Muffin, and published by Monkey Moon and Raw Fury. I played it on the Xbox One as it came onto Game Pass a few months ago.
Yes, I noticed it pop up. So could you give us a little description of the game in a nutshell?
It is a very narrative-driven, noir, investigative game set in Paris. So very French noir. And your main character who you play is a taxi driver. And the taxi driver has been attacked by a serial killer. And you wake up as the survivor, and the game is, can you now help the police solve the crime? Ooh. So the unique sort of aspect of this is that as a taxi driver, you are privy to a lot of conversations of people talking to you, and they use that device for you to become a sort of taxi driver come investigator. It's very story driven. There's no kind of platforming or action. It's all text. Well, it's not all text based. I mean, there's no voiceover. You're reading the text, and it's got quite sparse images to accompany that as well. That's in a nutshell.
Right. So no voice acting. You're recounting all the... are you recounting conversations, or are you having new ones? Or a bit of both?
No, you're having new conversations. You're with them in the taxi live. There's no flashback, as would be typical in a noir. Maybe that's to come onto my expectations, but there's no voice acting in it.
All right then. Well, let's get into that. What were your expectations going into this noir?
Well, I knew it would be a noir from the art, from the description of the game. I actually really do like noir as a genre, for all its pitfalls. I mean, a genre, actually, a lot of people would say it's not really a proper genre because it can be any number of things in terms of it being a police procedural, or social commentary or any of that. It's mostly, described as an aesthetic, than particularly a story genre. But I do like it. My expectations of it, therefore, are that it's going to be pretty grim. It's going to be cynical. There will probably be a lot of people smoking. I imagine there'll be a femme fatale. And, some kind of background of society crumbling and people, not feeling supported by that, I suppose, is what I associate mostly with noir. And I also think of jazz soundtrack, I suppose, when I think of noir as well. Some deep horns. We're talking Depression era America. So yeah, that's what I was expecting.
So is it set, did you say this already? Is it set in present day? I can't remember if you said that.
I didn't tell you. And it is set in present day.
Yes, because as soon as you start delving into your expectation of noir, you do think of, as you said, that a specific era. So that's interesting. So present day, and the taxi driver's French, but it's set in America.
Well,
is that right?
It's set in Paris.
Oh, sorry, it's set in Paris.
The taxi driver, we don't know everything about him. He is an immigrant from North Africa. Right. This is part of kind of like the main sort of undercurrent of story. Actually, is I don't know how familiar everyone will be with race relations in France, but there is in particular a lot of tension in France and in Paris with the white European history and the immigration of Algerians and Berbers and Arabs and all this
Yeah.
kind of community, not least to mention the contemporary government's attitudes to Muslims and so
Turkey
forth.
yeah.
So yeah, so that's our kind of character. He's an immigrant taxi driver making his way around Paris. And actually, on that point, before I move on from, I mean, I do want to sort of say obviously how it wasn't like the expectations, but
Right.
noir as a genre, if we're still going to call it that, and I am.
Let's go for it, because we're
I
talking
think-
about games, and I think it is more
Yeah.
cinema that gets hung up on it not being a genre. But
Yeah. I think one of the things that people don't necessarily know about where noir came from is that it was a film style that was founded by immigrants, in that it came very much from the German expressionist aesthetic of the 1910s and 20s. And, that in itself was born out of the fact that Germany was struggling psychologically with what happened in the First World War, and they needed to find new ways to express their sort of pain and fear and horror. And alongside that, they had no money at all. It's real poverty stricken. And so what they put on film were these, collaborating with artists to create strange shapes and angles. And it was cheap but effective way of communicating kind of where they were now with limited resources. And then, of course, with the rise of Nazism in the 30s, a lot of those makers went over to the US to escape. And that's really, they took those sort of dark, contrasting, psychological, grim aesthetics with them. And it became film noir off the back of the Great Depression in 1930s US. So when I say kind of like I had certain expectations of film noir, I was actually thinking of the typical things, I suppose, that came more along in the 1950s. But through playing this game, I remembered that origin of noir being
that's
about
so
immigration.
interesting.
And yeah. So that was good.
Yeah. So let's talk about, what happens with this expectation then going in, and your sort of general impression of the game as you started to get into it.
So as I say, you begin the game by waking up in a hospital. You've been attacked. You know that there's this through line of a serial killer story, and the police are saying to you, look, we've got some stuff on you. We know you've got a dodgy past or a criminal past, and we need you to help us catch this killer. So, you go to work, you go back to work as a taxi driver, and as you're ferrying passengers around, you can also pick up suspects in the case and try to get information out of them as well. And you can also go to sort of special locations and maybe pay off people for information. You do this and you really get to sort of be your own boss in this regard of choose where you go and what you do, but you're under the yoke of doing what the police tell you,
Right.
of needing to collect money from passengers so you can pay for your petrol, as well as bribing. And you work through the night. You work from about 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. So there's a time limit on what you can do as well. You get, I think it's 5 nights in total to be able to get to the end of completing this investigation.
Okay.
So there are quite a lot of restrictions on what you can do in terms of the murder storyline. Now, there's the overall murder storyline, which I think is really the frame for getting a beginning, middle, and end to this game. But alongside that, every passenger you pick up also has a story. And sometimes it's relevant to the case, and most of the time it's not. So you get to hear lots of really weird, interesting stories. And I think the fact that it's through the night is crucial. It's what makes it. Because you get... tourists who are completely lost in the city. You get people who are, escaping some sort of difficult background. You can choose to drive your homeless friends around, but they won't pay you. But you can have a chat with them and support them. There's people you're picking up from the police station, like young students who have been profiled by the police because of their race, and you're seeing like this real dirty understory of Paris throughout this whole experience. That is the thing that and I think I've read a couple of comments and reviews off the back of this. Everyone loves this section of it.
Right.
Everyone loves the bit of the game where you just drive around Paris and you pick up people and you hear their stories. And some of them are really, emotionally intense. Some of them are quite funny. One of them, you pick up Santa, who has misplaced his sleigh.
That's amazing.
And he's drunk and you have to go and help him out. One of my favourite pickups actually was a Japanese tourist who didn't speak any English, but you still have your dialogue choices of what are you going to say to him, and what you're trying to do is sort of come to some kind of understanding by the time you get to the end of your journey, and it was fascinating. And one of the things of that as well about how keenly I think the tourist and immigration and race relations aspect of it was observed. For example, there is Paris syndrome it's called Paris syndrome for Japanese tourists who come to Paris and are deeply disappointed by the experience. That was clearly, an example of that. So there were lots of examples of it, and even a ghost gets into the back of your cab at some point.
Okay, lovely.
And it's a young boy who smells of like burnt pastry, and you kind of figure out why, like what the story was behind that. There are so many things going on.
Sounds brilliant, and I've actually read about this game because, as you say, it was on Game Pass on the Xbox, and I also have an Xbox, and it's one of the ones that I kind of flagged to have a look at. And one of the things that I thought, what a great premise, was just literally what you've described, is this idea of people's stories unfolding in the back of your car, and you being in control of sort of how much of that you choose to invest in and act on. That just sounds like a really lovely setup.
They absolutely nail that aspect of it. I was gonna say the soundtrack. As I say, I was expecting bluesy jazz stuff. It's not. It's contemporary ambient electronica, and the design style that goes with it is noir, but they've got a lovely rhythm to it where you're talking to your passenger in the back seat, and then occasionally as you're driving past, it will just show an airplane going overhead or some passing lights, and it has this effect that it really puts you in the early hours of the morning. It's simultaneously calming and gripping. It's got this kind of like, bad stuff is happening and you feel a little bit tense about it in one way, but the music and the rhythm of the car and everything else about it is so soporific that it puts you in this unique space that exists only in those hours.
Oh, lovely. I really want to play it now, just off that description. So talk to me about anything else that you thought was a positive aspect of this game.
As I say, I think the various stories, I think the through line of looking at ethnic and cultural tensions in France is played really well. I enjoyed aspects of the murder mystery side of it.
Okay.
Because I do like solving puzzles, and it wasn't too easy. Like, they give you some weird clues that you have to piece together on your pinboard at the end of every night.
Okay.
I very much enjoyed that aspect of it. So the biggest appreciation for it is the atmosphere, and I would have played the entire game if it was just driving people around listening to their stories in the taxi. They did that bit so well.
Yeah, okay. So just off of... In fact, no. Let me get on to anything you found negative or challenging about the game first, and then I've got a couple of questions based on what you said. So what were the sort of downsides? I feel like there was a level of disappointment there, Tim. Am I right?
Yeah, there are downsides. Absolutely. It's in the framing mechanism. It's in the murder mystery police procedural stuff. So the biggest disappointment is when you start the game, you're given 3 options of stories. There are 3 murder cases to solve. So I played one through, I really enjoyed it, and I thought, great, I'm going to play the next one now. Because, as I say, there are certain passengers that are suspects that are highlighted, so you pick them up to progress your understanding of that storyline, and there are other people that aren't related. Now, what I presumed would happen is when I went on to the next murder case, I would be able to, continue with some of these stories, because you don't finish them off. You only get partway through a lot of the stories. I thought I would continue with those, but actually it's exactly the same game, but with a different mystery. So you still wake up in the hospital, you having been attacked. You pick up, I would say, maybe half of the people you've already spoken to and heard some of that story, and half are new. So it's got to, yeah, exactly. So although you're headed towards a different conclusion in terms of the murderer, you repeat a lot of the same game, and that is not fun.
Yeah, one of my questions you've basically just answered, which is replayability. Because something you said earlier made me think, oh, you must have to replay this to get to the conclusion.
Exactly, and that's what I was expecting. There is a mode, like a free roam mode you can play, where the timed aspect and the murder mystery aspect isn't part of it. I would recommend that mode. So I didn't want to go straight onto it because I'd already done, sort of half of it through the original game. But it's the kind of thing that maybe in a couple of years' time, when I've forgotten the specific details, I would come back and just play the free roam mode and explore all of those stories, because I did enjoy that.
Yeah.
But that was the real hang-up, is that game mechanic was it was not thought through properly. There are some other game mechanic aspects of it that weren't thought through. So, as I say, you have to pay for your petrol and you have to get an income. And the challenge is that although you have like a sat-nav experience where you can see where people are that you need to pick up, it doesn't tell you ahead of time where they're going and how much they're going to pay. And so you can't really be tactical about whether you're picking up a passenger or you're going for another one, because actually it makes more sense, to do that. That it wasn't very well signposted for you to be particularly strategic about it.
Yeah, which is
in terms of the strategy, there's a lot of guesswork.
But because it's so contemporary, all kind of private hire vehicle drivers now have the option. Well, a lot of them now, unless they're sort of pre-booked, and even when they're pre-booked via another company, via a parent company, they will know how long and how far their fare is. So like Uber as a very basic example, you can see how far people are going, and so therefore what the fare is. So that's really weird that it's removing that from you.
They put strategic restrictions on your gameplay, but they hadn't given you the tools to create a strategy.
Yeah.
So that was a complete mismatch.
Yeah, that seems really odd. So can you fail?
Yes.
Yes.
You can choose the wrong suspect. You have 5 suspects to choose from when you put the clues together. So you can choose the wrong suspect to fail first of all. You can also mishandle your final encounter with the actual murderer and get murdered.
Tim!
Which, if you've gotten to the end of 5 days of questioning people, you're a bit like, oh, that's really not how I wanted it to end. But if you do handle them properly, then you get quite a nice contemplative ending where you drive out of the city into the countryside and you're asked whether you're going to essentially go back to the city and carry on with your taxi driving, or get back in touch with, I will just leave it at, some people from your past.
Yeah, we won't spoil it. And in terms of things like dialogue choices, is there enough nuance for you in the writing?
Yes. Yeah, that aspect is really good because, with some consequence-based dialogue trees, you get a hint as to what the outcome is. Like, you'll get, this will cause a fight, or this is you persuading someone, or something. They don't have that. I mean, again, some players might say, well, that meant I couldn't form a strategy because I didn't know what the response was going to be. But actually, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. You weren't quite sure what the tone of the conversation was going to be from from step to step. And I think that's good, again, because of it being throughout the night.
Yeah.
You're never quite sure what state people are in.
Yeah.
You know, they might be happy, they might be insomniacs and going crazy. I don't know if you can imagine what that would be like. Or they might be drunk.
Tim. That's actually offensive to me. I am a lifelong chronic insomniac.
Yeah.
Tim likes to just joke about it like it's nothing.
So, yeah.
Great. So, were there any other things of note before we start to round up your review of this game?
I think I've given the main points of it. The gameplay is very wanting, but it's definitely worth delving into just to absorb that atmosphere, absorb the stories, maybe just play it on free play.
Yeah. And on that note then, who would you recommend this to? I
would recommend this, well, first of all, to people who enjoy narrative-driven games, who, you know, come with the expectation that they want something akin to an interactive film. I would also recommend it to taxi drivers, who I think will have a special interest in the way this is going along. I think it would be fascinating for anyone who is at all interested in kind of ethnic tensions in France. And I recommend it to insomniacs, who I think will deeply appreciate the vibe that's going on from 10 till 6.
I am going to play this when I should have played it last night, Tim. My neighbour had an illegal house party, because we're still in lockdown, which went on until 4 a.m, at which point they seemed to go quiet for about 40 minutes. And then just before 5 a.m, there was a full-blown fight in the house.
Wow.
They'd gone from getting drunk, singing. There was a lot of singing until about 4 a.m. Then there was, around about 5, a full-blown fight to the point where I was like, should I call the police? Because my walls, I live in a terrace house, but I can hear my neighbours like they're in the next room. Like, it's just so loud. I should have just got up and played a game. Should have played this. It would have been more fun than what I had to listen to.
Yeah, I can see the decision tree coming up in front of you.
Here it is.
Do I get into a fight? Do I persuade them?
Do I call the authorities? I did. I was a bit like that last night, actually. It was crazy. So, it's come to that point of this review, Tim. Are you ready?
You want me to throw a number at you?
I need you to rate this out of 10, please.
I'm going to go for 7.
Oh, that's quite high.
Yeah, which I was going to say, I think it's quite a generous 7. I think I give it a 7 because I have played quite a lot of narrative games and I enjoy narrative games. I think it found a style of its own, which I think is always commendable. You know, if you can find something that is pretty unique. Deeply flawed in a lot of the gameplay, so I definitely couldn't go higher than that. But I think if you're interested in narrative games, it's definitely worth your time, so it has to be a 7.
Okay, yeah. I mean, from some of the chat, I was thinking a bit lower than that. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to check this out anyway. I'm a big narrative game fan. So thank you very, very much.
You are welcome, my dear. Can I hear about yours now?
Yes! So,
all right, give me the hard deets.
All right, so the main the game I'm talking about is called Tell Me Why, which every time I can never remember the title, which makes me think it's a bad title because I can never remember it. But every time I then look at it to remind myself, what is that game called again? I then start singing, Tell me why I don't like Mondays.
Do you know what? I mean, I know we always descend into song, but I had Tell Me Why Ain't Nothing But a Heartache. Yeah, I had Backstreet Boys in my head.
Yeah. So, for anyone who hasn't listened to this podcast before, pretty much when it's just me and Tim, I have to sing something. It's not on purpose.
It turns into a musical a little bit, doesn't it?
And we hate musicals, so I don't know why that happens.
We really hate musicals.
Yeah, but the game is called Tell Me Why. Shall I tell you about it in a nutshell, Tim?
Yeah, tell me what, first of all.
Tell you what, in a nutshell. So Tell Me Why is a narrative-based adventure game. So another narrative-based game. And it is set in rural Alaska, where you are playing 21-year-old twins Tyler and Allison, who are reunited for the first time in 10 years following a separation forced on them after Tyler, when aged 10, kills their mother in self-defense. Yeah, so it sounds pretty intense, and it is, but it's also got a lot of lightness, a lot of heart. It's a lovely, lovely narrative-based game. So this is another game similar to yours, which is based on choices. So there's a lot of dialogue choices. There's a couple of action choices. Very story-driven. But it's also, and they don't tell you this in the description, but I would also say this is probably a magical realism game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's very rooted in reality. But then
I was just going to ask you to expand on magical realism as a genre in the way I started
With
going
the
off on one on noir. I'm like, all right, come on, let's do genres today. Tell me about magical realism.
I can't say the name of the Cuban guy who's credited as one of the main authors of magical realism because I can't pronounce it. Is it You know who I mean. 100,000 Years of Solitude.
Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
There we go. I can never remember his name, but he's one of the, as far as I know, I'm not as hot on this as other genres, but as far as I know, he's one of the kind of earliest credited people for delving into this idea of magical realism. And my understanding of its use in more modern things is that it's pretty much what it says on the tin, that you're very much in a kind of gritty, grounded world with gritty, grounded characters, but the aspects of what they're living through are pulled out and kind of pushed through a sort of fantastical element in order to then amplify the very grounded human experience.
Yes.
Anything to add?
Well done. No.
Yes!
Only well done.
Thank you.
I'm just
Thanks,
saying
mate.
well done.
Thanks, mate. I'm not as confident with describing these kinds of genres because they're a bit more niche. But yeah, it took a while for me to realise that's what was going on. And the reveal of it in this game is quite, it definitely levelled it up a few points for me.
Nice.
Yeah, so that was my sort of nutshell.
So did you know this genre was coming up? Does that feed into your expectations of the game, or did you hear anything else about it?
No, well, this game, I had a certain expectation about it because I know another game by the same developers. So the developers are, let me get this right, DONTNOD Adventure, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And they are the developers behind the sort of teenage time travel-y American games. Life is Strange, there we go, just remembered. Which I've only ever played a kind of free sample of when it first came out in like 2015 or 16, around then.
Yeah.
So I don't know the games that well because I only played like the first chapter of the first one, and I think there's been 2 Life is Strange games. But there is a kind of element of rewinding time in that, and every time you rewind time, there's consequences. So it is a bit different because you kind of go in knowing you've got a power quite early on, and you feel a bit more in control of that. And the choice making, from what I can remember, is a bit more obvious from the top. That, like, okay, if you decide to save this person, you're not going to get to this other person in time. So I feel like whereas this one, you go in and you, like, my expectation was like it's going to be very character driven, and you're going to get a lot of backstory about these characters' lives. And the reason for that is that right at the top of the game is that one of the twins, Tyler, is a trans man, and right at the top of the game is about Tyler returning to his very insular, very small rural Alaskan hometown and reuniting with his twin, and having not been in that town as a male, having been kind of as a 10-year-old sort of not quite understood and accepted for who he was when he left. So I very much thought this was going to be a relationship game, and I was looking forward to that, and I wasn't disappointed, because this game is very much about the relationship between a brother and sister, and I found that really unique because it reads very true. I asked you about nuance in dialogue choices. In this, it's so nuanced. There is no big sort of decision track that you can identify. There's no like, I'm going to play this kind of character, I'm going to play that kind of character. It's very much subtle. The characters' experiences feel so well-rounded. It's really well written and well researched in terms of particularly those two core characters, and you play both of them throughout the game, so you'll sometimes be Tyler and you'll sometimes be Alison.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you get to choose that, or is that just sort of segmented as part of the story?
Yeah, exactly. That's segmented for you. So you start with Tyler, and then you flip to Alison. And what's lovely about it is that you feel early on this is very much Tyler's story, because Tyler's got all this stuff that he's been through. He's going back. But then as you play, you actually realise Alison's got a hell of a lot of stuff that she hasn't unpacked, whereas Tyler's done a lot of unpacking. And so it's a beautiful sort of yin-yang experience with their characters, that actually you think he's going to be the more complex one, but actually he's very much about living his truth, whereas she's still unpacking lies. And when I get into the things that I really loved about the game, I'll come to that again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm ready to hear about the things you loved about the game. If you want to continue, yeah. I'm already hooked. By that. I mean,
so what really surprised me, from what I expected, I just expected a nice narrative, character journey, where we found out about their relationship. What I did not expect, and what I found, was one of these kind of magical elements that were really heightened and felt really dangerous, actually, and also this idea of a murder mystery. There's sort of a murder mystery at the heart of this story, in that right at the beginning you're told Tyler killed his mum in self-defense, and it feels like a kind of situation where they were neglected as children. Their mum was struggling with mental health issues. There was a lot of external pressures on her, and she just cracks at some point, and the poor children, they're 10 years old, do what they have to do to survive. But as you get into it, that's very much not what happens, and that's not a spoiler, because you get that in the first chapter. And I won't delve in too much about what I loved about what you learn, but what I will say is that this game is very much exploring that line between truth and lies in the kind of format and journey of solving a murder. So it becomes a whodunit, but a very grounded whodunit, a very human experience of the fact that everybody lies. It made me think about House quite a lot, the series House. Did you ever watch House? I loved it.
I watched it a little bit when you were watching it, but not really.
So the tagline for that is everybody lies, and it made me think about that a lot, and it also raised this question of why we lie to children so readily. And I don't know if that was its intention, but that's something that really jumped out at me, because from the age of 10, they're now only 21, so they're still very young, the characters. People have just lied to them to protect them. And people have felt like they've had to lie to them to protect them. And at points, they've even lied to themselves to protect themselves. And it's really interesting, I think, that they picked the age of 10, and now they're sort of 20, 21. Because between, I think, 7 and 10 is where children consolidate their ability to lie and to figure out what impact that has in the world, and them operating within the world. So I thought it was like a really nice age to pick. They're still very connected to their fantasy world and imagination and play, but at the same time they're still very aware that they can lie in order to survive. And then all the adults around them are lying to them in order to protect them. But obviously that becomes very damaging. And what I think is so fantastic about having a trans character at the very front and centre of this is that he is all about telling his truth and being his truth and living his truth. And so that, against this kind of backdrop of lies, which is what any murder mystery or mystery narrative is built on, is such a great foil. And it's really subtle in such a satisfying way. And as I'm going through, there's 3 chapters to this game. So as I'm going through the chapters, this expands more and more and more. And it's really clever.
It sounds so interesting. It makes me think, first of all, about, telling lies to children, that I think for a long time, there's not really a distinction between what's a story and what's a lie. Yeah. They are essentially the same thing. It's just our expectations that change, and also how it's applied in a social setting. So I think that's fascinating from first of all, from the perspective of what is a lie. It's like, well, it's a story, but it depends on what your intent is with telling that story, because we all tell stories to just make things easier to understand.
And I'm going to come in right there, because one of the other things I loved about this game, Tim, is that everything their mum told them was a story. So within the game, you have a reference book that you discover quite early on in the first chapter, and it's called the Book of Goblins. So when they were children, she called them her little goblins, and she created this storybook for them, which they co-wrote. Some stories she authored and some stories they authored, and you can actually see it in the game. It's just coloured in and fun little characters, and as you go through the game, you realise that some of the characters, particularly in the mum's stories, are very much things that she's hidden from them, and she's sort of told them through this story, but in a very sort of symbolic way, rather than telling them the truth. She's told them a story. So it's exactly what you just said, and I just think it's so clever to use that, because it's something that most of us as children will have experienced, and someone will tell, like, even if it's a parable, we've all experienced this kind of lesson through a story, or history of your family through a story, or reasons we can't do this, or reasons we have to do that through a story. So interesting.
The other thing I was thinking, because you said about murder, self-defense, and the age of the child being 10, is the age of criminal responsibility. Because I know that in the US, well, it varies by state, it can be as young as 6.
Oh gosh, really?
In South Carolina, it's 7 years old in 35 states in the US. And then it goes up to 11 years old in some other states. So, because the reason being, because I think it's 14 in this country. And so when you said 10, I thought, maybe kind of that's part of the reason. It might have just been under criminal responsibility, or it might have been over, depending where it's set.
This character might actually be in a state where it's younger, because there are consequences, even though this is found to be an act of self-defense. That's why the twins have been separated for so long. It's really interesting, and as I say, it's so grounded in reality, but then you have all this other stuff going on, all these sort of like little fantasy things. So the twins have this thing that they call their voice, which they think they didn't remember they had, and as they spend a bit of time together early on, they start bonding. I think you can slightly increase the rapidness of this bond by some of your dialogue choices, but it's not very clear. But part of the bonding is that they start sharing a voice, so they can actually hear each other in each other's head.
Right,
and
okay.
So that's
twin powers.
And that's a sort of first introduction to this kind of magical element. And so what some of the main action of the game is you unlocking memories, where they have to work together to sort of unlock memories, and they can watch themselves in a sort of fuzzy rendition of something that happened when they were 10. And often you have to make a choice between if you follow Alison's version of the memory or Tyler's version of the memory, and they're just slightly different. And again, it's just this thing of like, because no one's memory is reliable, and again it feeds back into that thing of truth and lies. And actually, in any mystery or any crime process, you're relying on people, and people are very unreliable, and people's memories are very unreliable. And I just think it's just so clever that on so many levels they're exploring this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is there anything else kind of positive you want to highlight in the game aside from what sounds like a very compelling story and characters?
Just, it's very important, I think, to mention that this is the first main studio or bigger budget game that features a trans character as its leading character. Also, they have done amazingly well with making sure that people on the crew and the writing team are as kind of reflective of the diversity in front of the camera, if you will, as behind the camera. It's very well researched. It's also set in a place that has an indigenous population, and that's all been very well researched. So I read about the kind of the lengths they've gone to make sure that all these characters and all these stories have been given the voice right from the beginning. The right kind of stories, the right kind of voices have been consulted. And all of these characters, the main characters in particular, are so well rounded. It's a really wonderful thing for a game, because games are very often about quite a simple character niche, or So I think it's really worth highlighting.
It sounds like in both of our games, they were improved by having stories we hadn't necessarily heard before, and just more of a diversity of stories. I mean, you can tick diversity inclusion boxes, but actually just hearing stories you haven't heard before makes it so much more interesting.
And this doesn't feel like a tick box, and I say that because we've both worked around industries that succumb to tick boxing because they feel they should and don't do it properly. This feels like a very sort of lovingly told story, and I think that what's interesting, as you say, the game you were talking about, as you were talking about the immigrant experience, I was like, wow, there's a lot of similarities between these two games. Just hearing more stories. We can't just hear the same stories all the time. Let's enrich ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Before we get too warm and fuzzy, though, is there anything negative you need to highlight?
Yes, there is. Unfortunately, like with a lot of point and click style narrative-based games, just the action, the getting from one side of a room to another, it's a bit slow. You can't make your characters run, and sometimes you're like, I just need to walk up a path to get to the next point in the story. And as much as I've enjoyed the really beautiful rendering of Alaska, it's really lovely to have something set there in the snow, this gorgeous landscape, some nice little kind of vistas that you occasionally get to look at. Occasionally I just want to get on with the game. And also there's some just strange things that you have to do, like in chapter 2. I know a lot of reviewers moaned about this section. There's a bit where you just have to count tins in a box for about 20 minutes. You're helping someone do a stock check, and it's like, why? It leads to a really nice scene, but the act of literally looking in boxes and counting tins, I was like, I'm not quite sure what this adds. And there's a lot about it that I just think, it's the same thing that I think with a lot of these kinds of games. So I just want the sort of moving to the point where you can select a button to interact with something to just be a bit more seamless. And sometimes you're kind of repositioning yourself for about 10 minutes to try and activate something, because you get a rumble when you're in the vicinity of a memory, for example. And there was one memory where I was like, I just can't activate it. I'm just not stood in the right place. So I had to go onto YouTube to be like, how do I activate this memory? It's not working. Is it a bug? And all I had to do was, I was in the right place. I had to just look up with the camera. And I was like, that annoys me, because it takes me out of this gorgeous sort of flow and the subtlety of the storytelling. Because then I'm like, I am just pressing buttons and playing a game. So for me, that's the sort of the biggest downside, I'd say.
It's funny. I think sometimes with these narrative games, the creators sort of lose their nerve a little bit, and they feel like they need to introduce more elements of gameplay than they really do. it's kind of like, don't put an artificially gamey moment into this if I don't actually need it. Like, it should be there to advance the story, not just to make sure I'm still paying attention.
I really don't know who signed off on let's make a character go and count tins. I really don't.
Maybe they were sponsored by Tesco. Who knows?
No, it's just really weird.
All right. Anything else you want to add on before we start to wrap up?
So I guess, let's see. I guess I just want to highlight again that this is a different kind of choose your own adventure narrative story, and I've never really played anything this subtle. And I really appreciated that. And I know I've read quite a lot of reviews because I've been thinking about this game. I've been playing this for a week and I've been thinking about it almost every night when I stop playing it. And so I've read a few reviews and a lot of people whinged about it not being clear what side of the fence you're coming down on. Then saying, well, there wasn't even a fence, so what's the point? But I've got the complete opposite view of that. And I think, so now moving into recommendations, I would say, if you're someone who likes narrative games, but you need to really come down hard on being one type of character or another type of character, either challenge yourself by playing this game, so have a go at something different, or give it a miss if you really, really need those kind of choice-based games where you have to know that you made a massive difference because you selected option B and not option A. So that's one thing I'd kind of highlight. For me, it was a positive. But I know for a lot of reviewers, that was something they didn't like. Yeah.
That was the same for me in this experience as well. I really enjoyed owning the fact that I wasn't quite sure what impact I'd had or what impact I was going to have. And I know that for some people, that's not a game. Like, if you don't have a specific set of rules set out by which you can play, then it doesn't really feel like a game. So yeah, I had a similar experience, but I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
So does that lead you on to a rating?
Oh, I think I'm there. I am going to give this an 8.5 out of 10. The slight clunky moments of gameplay just knock it down from a 9. But for me, and I will caveat that by saying, I think that you will have an emotional response to this game, or you won't. And I think that will make the difference between how you would rate it. So have a think about if those themes resonate with you, if that kind of tone and pace, it's quite a slow-paced game, resonates with you. But for me, kind of 8.5 out of 10, definitely. I really recommend it.
Nice. I think for both of these, maybe Google a quiz on how do I cope with uncertainty. And if it comes out that you cope quite well with uncertainty, play these games. And if you don't.
Oh, here's a good litmus paper for it, Tim, actually, is how have you coped with the pandemic? When you're at home, have you ever been bored? If the answer is yes, this game may not be for you. If the answer is no, because there's always things to learn and experience.
That's a good point.
Then yeah.
I haven't been... I mean, I don't get bored.
No.
I haven't been bored. So,
I have. The only times I get bored is if I'm in a place and I cannot control my exposure to stuff that would interest me. Like if I'm in a waiting room and my phone dies, for example, then I'm going to get bored. Or if I'm in a queue and there's nothing to do. But yeah, I'm with you, and I do think that's a good litmus test, actually. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
That was a good combo of offerings for people who are interested in that sort of stuff anyway.
Yeah. And look, and I should have said I played this on Xbox Game Pass. It's also available on PC. I think that's it. I don't know if this is on... Yeah, it's just PC and Xbox, this one. So no PlayStation for this one either. That's weird, isn't it?
We've snubbed the PlayStation twice. Sorry.
I think this one was actually... this one was actually published by Xbox Game Studios, so that might be why for this one.
Okay.
But, so I think if you've got a Game Pass, enjoy, because a lot of new things have popped up in the last month. And these kind of slightly shorter games, I think this has got about a 10-hour playthrough. They're quite nice to sort of dip in and out of. So
Lovely.
I think that's it. But I just want to say a massive thank you to you listeners for tuning into this. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've played any of these games or any games that are similar, I think that we're sort of experiencing a bit of a shift in narrative-based games at the moment, because we can read the kinds of games that are being invested in now are actually do have the space to employ different writers, a bit more research. So I think we're coming into a new age of these kinds of games. Do you feel the same, Tim?
I mean, I do. I have noticed it that the stories are fresher, they're more interesting, and I think there's also something about doing it collectively that people have realised that you don't, when you have people around, to your place to play games together, it doesn't always have to be Mario Kart.
Yeah.
Like, we can have a collective sort of filmic experience. Especially one that sparks a bit of discussion around interesting topics. So yeah, I'm seeing a shift.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I mean, yeah, if you're enjoying any similar games, want to recommend any to us, please do. We're on the socials. But that is, I think, the end of the episode. So thank you very much for joining me today, Tim, brother from a different mother. Oh, the dog
Thank
joined
you, sister
in
from
there.
a different mister.
Hey.
Yeah.
And please give us a follow. We are on all the podcasting apps, and if you feel up to it, we'd love a 5-star review on iTunes. So please do that, because it really helps us get found in searches, and we want to chat games to more of you. So please do that if you can, and share with your game-loving friends. Why not? We're going to be coming at you thicker and faster. Oh, that sounds rude. We're going to be putting out more episodes, is what I'm trying to say.
Just wanted clarity on what was going on.
I've had one glass of wine, Tim. But thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye from me, Jem.
Goodbye from you, Jem, and me, Tim.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.